Well, every new year brings a bright, fresh, shiny, optimistic outlook on life. Is the attitude I used to hear around New Year's. But this year, all I've heard from people is pessimism about their outlook on life in 2024. Could be their health and the deterioration of our healthcare system, or maybe it's their job they hate, a lot of that going around. Maybe some of you saw this headline just this past week. New poll suggests nearly half of Ontario hospital workers dread going into work. Union calls upon province to address staffing crisis. Even teachers and police, at least based on the ones I know, feel the same way. They dread going into work and would quit tomorrow if they could afford it. Because being financially locked into a job you dread going to, I can tell you from personal experience, it can make you feel really miserable and pessimistic about your future. Then there's NANO's research that just conducted a poll on the optimism of Canadians, concluding it shouldn't be a surprise that younger Canadians are less satisfied with Canada as a country. With rising interest rates, difficulty in paying the rent or a mortgage, and struggling to pay for groceries, we are in an environment where the young, usually the most positive and hopeful, are now the most negative and pessimistic.
Ew.
There's lots of good reasons for people to be discouraged about their futures today. And if you follow what else Satan's minions in the WEF, in world governments and in our governments, still have planned for us, you too know there are darker days ahead planned for us, which of course is consistent with Scripture's end times forecast. Darker days are coming. And there's very little we can control about how it's all going to go. And Christians whose faith is weak, Christians whose relationship with God is disregarded, Christians who aren't used to taking risks or making sacrifices to follow Jesus, aren't familiar with Scripture, haven't cultivated a good prayer relationship life with God, will be shaken by what's coming. And I'm willing to bet most of us in here feel pretty confident about our faith being strong enough. But I think that's only because the faith of Christians in Canada, your faith and my faith, hasn't really been tested like it has in other parts of the world. Like it soon will be in our little corner of the world. But the good news for Christians is that we can endure all of it also with optimism and hope and joy and peace internally, regardless what happens around us or to us externally. But it depends on the degree to which your life so far has been about closely following Jesus and allowing your faith to be tested in smaller ways, maturing your faith to get us ready for what's coming. Like a toddler who just went from crawling to standing upright, holding onto that coffee table, at some point, he's got to let go and risk falling if he's ever going to make it over to his parents on the couch, calling him to come. And then learn to walk down the stairs, and then across the road, and then ride a bike. Or, like so many Christians in North America, just keep holding on to that safety net of a coffee table for dear life. Maturing in your faith, following Jesus, so we can experience the joy and peace of God during the tumultuous events we'll face in our lifetime, requires risk and sacrifice, like growing well in almost anything does, like we'll see in this morning's passage with the disciples of Jesus.
Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he sent away the multitudes. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Now when evening came, he was alone there. But the boat was now in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary. Now in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went to them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, "It is a ghost," and they cried out for fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Be of good cheer, it is I, do not be afraid." And Peter answered him and said, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." So he said, "Come." And when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him, and said to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. Then those who were in the boat came and worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God."
Thank you, Jesse. Now, when you put the other gospel accounts of this story together, the disciples set sail from Bethsaida in the north and were heading to Capernaum in the west. A short trip for the disciples who grew up fishing and navigating these waters. And as they set sail, Jesus stays behind and heads up a mountain or hilltop to pray. Now, it must have been a pretty bad storm they sailed into, because by evening, the boat was now in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary. These experienced sailors have been blown out into the middle of the sea, so out here somewhere, eventually landing by the end of our story, somewhere around here. Now, our story says, the story's moved on. It's no longer evening. It's the fourth watch of the night. So somewhere between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m., but likely closer to dawn, since they had just enough light to see Jesus coming from a distance. So all night is how long the disciples have been fighting against this storm, which is also how long it apparently took Jesus to finish up praying and then walk down from the Bethsaida hilltop all the way out to where the boat was. Jesus walking on water being the first of 4 miracles the disciples witnessed in this story. But through the driving winds and rain, with only a hint of pre-dawn light, they think they're seeing a ghost headed straight for them, and they're so scared they cried out in fear. But Peter must have recognized Jesus' voice. "Be of good cheer, it is I, do not be afraid." Because when Jesus commands him to come, Peter just steps overboard. Peter's walking on water being the second miracle the disciples witnessed in this story. And how far did Peter get before he started to sink? Well, we don't know, but we do know he walked on water towards Jesus. And he made it close enough to him for Jesus to reach down and stop Peter from drowning. And then, presumably, they would have walked back to the boat together. And as they climb into the boat, that's when the raging winds all of a sudden just stop. That being miracle number 3 the disciples witness in this story. Miracle number 4 occurring when they land. When they had crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret. And when the men of that place recognized him, they sent out into all the surrounding region, brought to him all who were sick, and begged him that they might only touch the hem of his garment. And as many as touched it were made perfectly well. So here we have in just 14 verses, the disciples witnessing 4 amazing miracles. Right? Jesus walking on water, Peter's walking on water, Jesus calming the storm, and then people being healed just by touching the hem of Jesus' clothes. Miracles that make us wish we were there to see those kinds of amazing things for themselves. Right? Lucky disciples. But my first question about this entire story has always been, since Jesus most certainly knew a really bad storm was coming, how could he just send them out into the middle of it? Which is the question I think we often ask of ourselves when we're in a tough spot. Health, financial, relational, whatever. God, how could you let this happen? Well, we know in our story, for the disciples, God didn't let it happen to his disciples. It wasn't the consequence of a bad choice the disciples made, nor was the enemy responsible for the bad situation. It was clearly God's will that it happen. So whatever situation you find yourself in, you have to at least be open to the possibility that not only is God trying to grow my faith through these menacing, terrifying circumstances, that maybe it's God who's responsible for my being in these menacing, terrifying circumstances in the first place to get my faith in him to grow. I mean, Jesus knew the severity of the storm he was sending them into. I mean, for all we know, Jesus created this specific storm for the specific purpose of sending his disciples out into the middle of it. And I think even the disciples, at least the ones who grew up fishing these waters, could also discern that there was a bad storm looming in the distance. Which is why, at the beginning of the story, Jesus had to make his disciples get into the boat and go. The Greek word for make here meaning to necessitate, to compel, to drive, whether by force, threats, persuasions, or some other means. So if Jesus had to make, compel, or drive them into the boat and go, which we've not seen Jesus have to do ever before, they must not have wanted to go, and it's probably because they could all see a bad storm coming, and the last place they know they should be during a storm is out in the Sea of Galilee. Right? So all this would have seemed, I think, so unreasonable to the disciples at the time, as it would have to us. Right? Why would Jesus send us into such obvious danger? Why not just wait out the storm? Jesus didn't grow up fishing these waters like we did. He doesn't understand how deadly navigating these waters during a storm can be. At least not like we fishermen do. We know better than Jesus does in these circumstances. Anyone else besides me ever reason or, think that way with God? Logic and reason and common sense says, don't take the risk. It's not safe. And of course, like us, the disciples did have a choice here. Obey Jesus' command to go ahead of him to the other side, or err on the side of self-preservation and disobey Jesus. But proving themselves true disciples of Jesus, they set aside what they wanted and complied with his will. And where did it get them? Off course, fighting for their lives. But becoming the only people to ever see a person walk on water and control the wind. But imagine if a disciple stayed behind to wait out the storm, or walked around the shore to meet them on the other side just to play it safe. Imagine the regret he would feel when the disciples arrive safely to the other side with Jesus somehow in the boat, and then hear their stories. Right? Jesus did what? And then Peter walked on water? That Peter? That guy? So when you find yourself in a bad situation, and there's no way forward, and there's no way out, and many of us have been there more than once, and will be again, it could be the consequences of your poor life choices. It could be the enemy. Or it may very well be Jesus, so he can grow your faith. Because it's in those impossible situations God reveals himself to you, as Luke 1:37 says, as God with whom nothing is impossible. And he wants us to know it. I mean, it's one thing to intellectually understand that with God, nothing shall be impossible because the Bible tells me so. It's a whole other faith-building experience to actually see him perform impossible miracles personally, specifically, just for you. Faith-building opportunities we deny ourselves when we play it safe. Refusing to let go of the coffee table because the couch seems too far. Refusing to get into the boat because we see the risk ahead in the storm clouds. Maybe there's a risk today, or a big risk you're pretty sure Jesus has been after you to take for some time. It might just be the opportunity of a lifetime to see Jesus do something miraculous for you and grow your faith, preparing you for the bigger tests of our faith that are most certainly coming, like the one Peter is about to face. Where Jesus' first command in this story was to go, Jesus now commands Peter to come. Now, we usually give Peter a hard time here for being impulsive. It's what he does, trying to prevent Jesus from going to the cross, promising Jesus 3 times he would not deny him, cutting off a soldier's ear, and this time his impulsiveness for Jesus, or passion for Jesus, has him wanting to jump out of a perfectly good boat in the middle of the sea during a storm. Now, in my active imagination, in my mind's eye reading the story, half the disciples are thinking, there he goes again, somebody better stop him. While the other half were probably sitting back thinking, this ought to be interesting. Let's see what happens. Because as soon as Jesus commands Peter to come, Peter just comes, stepping out of the boat, willing to risk drowning. And he almost did drown. But first, he walked on water with Jesus. Now, did he have great faith? Was he some sort of super Christian? No, at least not yet. Jesus says, "Oh, you of little faith. Why did you do?" It was just little faith in Jesus and the courage to obey Jesus. Obedience and just a little faith in Jesus that enabled Peter to walk on water, which is mostly how we express the level of our faith in Jesus, not by the strength of our wishful thinking, but through courageous obedience. And if Jesus called Peter's faith in him little, after successfully walking on water, how would you say your faith measures up? When you consider for a moment the times your sense of self-preservation or sense of self in general has prevented you from obeying him, which we've all regrettably done, I'd say. Because Peter, impetuous, passionate for Jesus, willing to look foolish to follow Jesus, 2,000 years later still holds the Guinness Book of World Records for most water walked. Because he first obeyed Jesus' command to go into the boat and go into the storm, and then obeyed Jesus' second command to come out of that boat and onto the water. And as amazing as it would have been to be in that boat and witness Jesus and Peter walking on water, that's not the highlight of this story. And as amazing it would have been for Peter to actually experience walking on water, right? To feel the water under your soul supporting your weight with every step. That's not the highlight of this story. And after the storm's been raging all night, suddenly goes calm. Jesus revealing his authority over his creation. That's not the highlight of this story. Nor is people's getting healed when they get to shore just by reaching out and touching the hem of Jesus' clothes. The highlight of the story is not the miracles, but who the miracles point to. Because the disciples expressed the little faith they did have through their obedience to Jesus' very risky sounding commands, They saw and recognized in Jesus for the first time God himself. Then those who were in the boat came and worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Or in other words, truly, you are Almighty Creator, God incarnate, God in person, with whom nothing is impossible. Through all of it, because the disciples were willing to go through it all, their faith in Jesus grew as they came to know him more personally, more thoroughly, as the God with whom nothing is impossible. And that's how Jesus grows our faith in God too, through personally experiencing him in your life for yourself. So if you find your Christianity boring or unfulfilling or purposeless or lacks miracles, maybe it's because you've been unwilling to let go of that coffee table and head to that couch. Or unwilling to go into the storms Jesus is calling you to risk. Or unwilling to come out of that boat you've been trusting in for your safety. I mean, only you know what you've said no to Jesus about in the past. And only you know what Jesus is calling you to today. So that you too might experience Jesus for yourself as the water-walking, miracle-working God in the flesh, God in person for whom nothing is impossible. So given the opportunity, let go of that coffee table. Go into that boat and go into that storm where Jesus is sending you. And then come out of that boat Jesus is calling you out of and risk drowning if that's where he's calling you to. That is what being a disciple of Jesus looks like. And it's what being a biblical Christian looks like. And it's what a Christian growing in their relationship, trust, and faith in God looks like. And he's not doing it to give you a hard time. He's not doing it for your benefit, for his benefit. He's doing it for your benefit. Trying to grow us, soft Canadian Christians and our faith all the way up to Peter's little water-walking faith, and then into strong, unyielding faith in Jesus that can weather any and every storm Satan, his minion, and our governments have yet to attack us with. Agree with Jesus to test your faith, with his storms and the smaller things today, so you can, with great faith and optimism and hope and joy and peace, face the storm we know the biblical weather forecast promises is coming. Well, stand with me and let's sing our praise to God, Jesus Christ, who is worth every risk.